Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Even as MPs debated the bill, word emerged of a round-robin letter signed by pro-Brexit Tory MPs, urging the government to ensure that no one seeks to use a transition period as a means of keeping the UK in the EU by stealth. It goes on, we must be free to negotiate and sign trade deals during the transition period. It was a thinly veiled attack on senior cabinet ministers, and where they're trying to take policy. There's a widespread expectation amongst MPs that in the end, the government will have to concede backbenchers some kind of oversight of which bits of European law can be changed by fast-track procedures. But the touted letter from Tory MPs who seem unhappy with the drift of government policy on a transition agreement, a reminder that's just one major headache this autumn. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, Westminster.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Conservative MP and junior government aide Suella Fernandez, who leads the European Research Group of Tory MPs and has circulated that letter Gary was just talking about, warning Theresa May against any transitional deal which would keep Britain in the single market. I began by asking her, what was the idea behind this letter?
It was a letter expressing support for the government's position to leave the single market, to leave the customs union, to make a success of Brexit and honour the result of the referendum. And importantly, to highlight the inconsistency and the betrayal of the Labour Party when they make it clear that they want to remain part of the single market, which really doesn't do justice to Brexit.
The government have made it clear, Downing Street have made it clear that what's in the letter is not government policy.
The letter is supportive of government policy because we are saying that we support leaving the single market, because when you're on part of the single market...
Yeah, but you've gone beyond government policy is the point. I mean, you may support some bits of government policy, but you've gone way beyond the government's position, and that is clearly seeking to bind its hands. That's not helpful. That's really quite problematic for Theresa May.
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to, because the letter clearly states that we want to leave the single market, leave the control of the European Court of Justice, and ensure that we have control over free movement of people.
Well, maybe you should talk to Downing Street, because they're the ones who say you've gone beyond government policy.
The letter is that Conservative members support Brexit and the government. That's what the letter's about.
So do you agree with Philip Hammond when it comes to Brexit, the Chancellor?
Absolutely. Philip Hammond has repeatedly stated for everybody that leaving the EU means leaving the customs union, it means leaving the single market, and I support him in his engagement with business and his need and the importance that he places on providing certainty for businesses, on providing predictability, on providing them with time to adapt and make changes, and I'm all in favour of that, because this is about a Brexit which is prosperity-led.
If you don't get a deal, then what happens? We do go over a cliff edge, don't we? Because we just leave.
If we don't get a deal...
And we don't have any kind of deal.
Well, again, as the government has made clear on numerous occasions, and something I wholeheartedly support, that if the EU is not going to be reasonable with Britain in this negotiation and there is a bad deal as an option, then no deal is for sure better than a bad deal.
Could you also just explain to us what is the European Research Group? Because a lot of people are saying it's effectively a party within a party. It's a group of hardline Brexiteers, some of whom are government ministers, operating within the Conservative Party and taking public money, because a lot of you use public money as MPs to fund this group, the ERG.
The European Research Group has been in existence for many, many years, actually, and its express mission is to support the government to deliver a Brexit which is reflective of the result of the referendum and which is prosperity-led and successful.
You take public money?
It is funded by public money, and it has been for many years, yeah.
How many government ministers are in it?
I'm not going to say how many government ministers are in it, because it is essentially a group of members of Parliament.
It's a secret society, is it?
It's not a secret society. It's a European
So
research
why won't
group.
you say how many ministers are in it?
It's a group of MPs who've supported, who are supporting the government to deliver a Brexit which works for everybody, representing all strands.
So why can't you tell us who's in it?
If
we pay for it, we ought to know who's in it.
It's a group of MPs which is committed to delivering the government's agenda.
Yeah, but who?
And supporting the government.
Sorry, you just said you take public money, therefore the public ought to know where its money is going. Who are the members?
It's all on the public record, and people are able to disclose their name. I've told you, and
where
I'm not
can
going
we see
to change,
the list?
That the members of the European Research Group are a group of MPs who support the government's agenda in delivering
But where can we see the list of members?
The list of members is kept by the European Research Group.
So where can we see it, the people who pay for it?
It's available if necessary.
Well, I'm asking you, therefore it's necessary. Where can I see this list?
It's available because everyone has to declare...
Okay, well, can I have it?
This is not something for... But I can definitely provide that. It's a list of MPs who make clear their declarations of contributions to the European Research Group. It funds a researcher who is providing research on a parliamentary basis for matters to do with the European Union.
Suella, thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Now, a number of your colleagues have signed this letter that was going to be published in a Sunday newspaper to Theresa May, essentially saying do not allow a transitional period to keep us in the EU by stealth. Will you be adding your name to that letter?
This is not a letter that was right for me. I thought it was too prescriptive, but it was very much not aimed at our government. It was aimed at the Labour Party, who have changed their position since the general election. They had an election manifesto that said that they would end uncontrolled immigration, leave the single market. They said they would take back control of trade policy, leave the customs union, and they performed a massive U-turn, talking about a transitional period without end. A bit like Hotel California. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave.
So you're saying this isn't aimed at Theresa May?
Not at all. The government has been really clear. They said, look, we're leaving the single market.
Why do you need a letter then? The Labour Party isn't making the policy.
We're leaving the single market, we're leaving the customs union, we're going to finish that implementation period by the time of the next general election. Labour has done a U-turn, and this letter is about highlighting how Labour have backsliding and are having this transition period without any end.
And, you know, you're part of this group, the European Research Group, which is Tory backbenchers essentially pushing to make sure that Brexit happens. It's chaired by your colleague Suella Fernandez, and she, it appears, has circulated this letter among colleagues. Some people are saying that, as such, she should lose her position as a government aide to the Treasury.
I don't accept that at all. You know, the European Research Group is what it says on the tin. It's a group that looks at and researches into all the laws which are going through Parliament at the moment on Brexit. It includes people who backed Leave, includes people like me who backed Remain. All of us are united by taking a real interest in making sure we have a Brexit that works for Britain. But
you are very much pushing for Brexit to take place, and this letter, some might say, is essentially lobbying the government.
Well, it's not that we're pushing for Brexit to take place. We're pushing to make sure the referendum is respected, the instruction of the British people to leave the European Union is respected, that we take back control of our borders, end uncontrolled EU immigration, and make sure that we have a trade policy which is made in London and Britain and not in Brussels.
But look, some of your colleagues have been pretty angry about this letter. Stephen Hammond said that rebel MPs should sign and resign. That might include Suella, but also, although he hasn't signed it, there is some talk about Steve Baker, who used to run your group and now is a Brexit minister and appears to have added his name to a WhatsApp group perhaps around it. Nicky Morgan, meanwhile, says it's not fair for ministers to be heavily involved in backbench affairs when they are involved in collective responsibility. Do you disagree with Stephen Hammond and Nicky Morgan?
I think they've misunderstood. They've misunderstood what this letter is about. It's not aimed at the government, it's aimed at the Labour Party. They're hopelessly split on the whole issue of Brexit. You've got Jeremy Corbyn, who seems to want to leave. You've got the rest of the Labour MPs who seem to want to defy the referendum and remain in Europe. And what we're highlighting is, you know, a transition period without end is not leaving the European Union.
You say it's for the Labour Party, but is it addressed to Jeremy Corbyn, this letter?
It's addressed to set out what should happen and that there should be a transition period with an end. And that is government policy.
But who's it being sent to? Who's the recipient of the letter?
I was not signatory of this letter. I don't know what the purpose of this letter is, but I've read the text, and the text is very clearly that there should be a transition period with an end. And that is the current government policy, and the Labour Party have shifted their position. They've done a U-turn, and the concern is that they want us to remain in the European Union by stealth.
So you're certain it's not to Theresa May, it's not in any way trying to lobby government policy?
I think the government have a really clear position. I think the most important thing is not letters, not process. It's making sure we have a Brexit that works for Britain, supporting the government in their negotiations with Brussels. And the real question is, how do we make sure that Brussels gets on with the negotiations so we can give more certainty to the businesses and people of this country in what Brexit is going to look like.
And you're very comfortable with Suella both leading your ERG group but also being in government?
Well, Suella is an outstanding ministerial aide. She works really hard, does a great job in the Treasury. Steve Baker has made a flying start as a minister. You know, they're both excellent people and they deserve to be supported.
Conservative MP Charlie Elphicke talking to me earlier. So, Isabel, was this letter designed to lobby government?
Well, I think what the letter shows is a scale of concern within the Tory parliamentary party about the possibility of a rather elongated transition period. And there are differing views within the cabinet about how long the transition period should last. I think there is an acceptance on the part of even the most strident Brexit ministers that there has to be a transition period and that will be probably around 2 years and it must have a full stop. But as Charlie Elphicke there was saying, the grave concern is about Labour's position and the idea that they want to continue the so-called transitionary period until everything is worked out. Now, that is a how long is a piece of string situation. And in fairness, you can't blame Labour and people like Keir Starmer for wanting to extend it for as long as possible because they don't believe we should leave anyway.
But, you know, Jack, there is this group, the European Research Group. They say they're just there to do a bit of research on Brexit and it's all government policy. It's led by Suella Fernandez, who interestingly is an aide to the Treasury, which is led by Philip Hammond, who I suspect is one of the people Isabel is talking about when there's disagreements in the cabinet.
Yeah, and she's definitely sailing close to the wind. I mean, it's a matter for Theresa May how her ministers or their aides act and what she thinks is acceptable and what isn't.
Because Steve Baker actually resigned from the group.
Right, exactly. And the one thing that Charlie Elphicke said there, I think was a little disingenuous when he said this group is just what it is. It's a European research group. They've clearly come up with the most boring sounding name for their caucus that they possibly can to make it sound as uninteresting and unsinister as it can. What it actually is a very powerful...
Is it sinister?
Jack, come on, if that's your definition of sinister, I think that a lot of things are going to spook you out.
But isn't there an issue here that, you know, Theresa May is dealing with real big competing factions in her party?
That's it. And what's interesting about it as well is the way that WhatsApp, this messaging service, has suddenly had this big impact in Parliament because it's allowing MPs to organise very quickly and effectively. And I'm sure the other side are doing it as well. We just don't know the name of their WhatsApp group yet. But it's actually allowing them to be very disciplined. They can speak to each other all the way through the day. People aren't just coming out and saying things. They can...
Or rather indisciplined, making trouble. I mean, I think it's worth pointing out that the ministerial aide concerned, Suella, she's not a senior figure in the government. You know, PPSs, they're not paid. It's the bottom rung of the ladder, as it were. And I don't think this is an excessively disloyal manoeuvre. You know, we're in a very heated period for Brexit debate, and this is just a bunch of MPs who want to make sure that the government stands firm against what's an awful lot of noises off.
So you think, no question, that she should lose her job over this?
In my view, no, but, you know, it's not up to me.
I think it's unlikely, but partly for just the reason that Theresa May is not in a strong position to do anything that might upset, you know, such a big number of her
And
own
isn't that
MPs.
one of the problems? Because she's got no majority, actually both sides of this debate are essentially holding her prisoner to some extent.
That's exactly right. And yesterday we saw her having 2 rebellions from different parts of her party on the same day in the Commons. We saw it earlier, people like Dominic Greaves attacking her bill to get Brexit through. And then on the same day, the other side of the party putting together this lobbying letter to try and hold her feet to the fire of how hard Brexit is. She's in an impossible position and there really isn't anything she can do about it because she has no Commons majority.
And Isabel, those people like Dominic Grieve who are really laying into the EU withdrawal bill, do you think they're essentially trying to scupper Brexit?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, I have the greatest respect for Dominic Grieve. He argued very powerfully yesterday. He did make the point, though, that the bill itself is essential. I think that there is a bit of using this as a proxy for just a fundamental anti-Brexit position. I mean, I read the editor of the Evening Standard, George Osborne's column on this yesterday, his editorial, and I expected to disagree with every word of it and actually found myself rather attracted to his rhetoric. You know, to talk about the importance of Parliament and democracy, it sounds brilliant, but remember, a lot of these powers are ones that we blithely nodded away to Brussels, and all we're doing is bringing them back here. So I didn't hear all these people making a hue and a cry every time we transferred this and that regulation from our own jurisdiction over to Brussels.
Well, we'll be hearing lots more about that next week.